Oh, hi, Doc.
Hi.
Hi, we're here. Um,
No, we're not. We're not gonna. I'm sorry. Nerd Titan.
yeah,
Perfect.
yeah, that's
That
great.
that's
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 great.
so true.
That's how we
Yeah.
start. That's how we start.
Or
Um,
we could just grab those memories and bring them up, and then you have to deal with repressed stuff.
no,
So
it's fine. So let's just start with this. Thank you, Nerd Titan, for giving us the new tagline for the podcast that we are doing here. Uh,
can't
Doc
ruin my
ruins
childhood.
yeah, Doc ruins childhood. Can't ruin my childhood if I don't remember it. And that actually does make sense because nostalgia isn't just the loving of something from back when. It is literally changing how you actually remember it to glorify it. So when you have a nostalgia for something, it's not actually just a good thing. It's you're choosing whether by choice or subconsciously to make it better than it was. So that's why it's Doc Ruin's childhood. We're gonna go into this. So whole premise is that Doc plays lots of games, and he's friends with lots of people that play lots of games. So Doc is also somebody with a critical logic thinking brain, and I wanted to get somebody unbiased on things that all of us really really like. So we're starting off with I think my favorite game of all time. It's always in the top. Like you know how it's what's your favorite movie and the list changes. What's your favorite game and the list changes. This is a game that is always in my top three, always since I want to say like 9 years old. This was the first Super Nintendo game that I played all the way through. This is the first RPG I ever played. So, of course, my bias is this is one of the all time best games, and a lot of people agree with me. But all of us are pretty tied up in that nostalgia. So, Doc, I want you to give me your summary of the game. You basically got to play it, for a few hours each week for a month. So we didn't get through the entire thing, but we definitely got a big enough chunk to be able to.
He did.
You got
I
through.
I I took a day and just played the game
Oh
because
wow.
I. It's not fair to judge a game by like the first couple of hours of play, especially
Okay.
when it's a what I think I got it. I think I feel like it's an 18-hour whole game. Like if you played it,
Ooh.
if just straight through, it's
Sure.
18 hours. If you don't do any of the side quests, which
Okay.
I'll talk about those in a little bit, but
Okay. Fair enough. So then I'll tell you what. Give me your summary of the game.
basically playing the game. Final Fantasy is one of those things that I've had a love-hate relationship for a long time. So you started me off on something very strong when we talk about your childhood, which is Final Fantasy. I've always loved the story of Final Fantasy, which is usually a big thing for me, which this game, I will give it kudos, continues on with that rich environment, that history, that storytelling thing. I not a big fan of turn-based fight games, and I don't like a lot of. Let's start with the summary.
Yeah.
First off, beautiful game. You talk about 16-bit era when it comes to Super NES, and they used every piece of that 16-bit. When it comes to Super Nintendo games, it's hard to find one where they actually used every little thing that they possibly could to
Hmm.
create a good graphic or whatever it was. There's hit or miss when it comes to graphics in the game, but they did a really good job. And for 16-bit sound, they really did a beautiful thing. When I wasn't playing, certain emulators had better music than other emulators.
Hmm.
I learned very quickly I do not like online emulators to save my life, and it's pretty there. It's a game where you start off like all great games do with nostalgia or with amnesia. And as you move forward through the game, you find out little tidbits, you see what's going on, and you can make dramatic different changes. Like Mike told me early on, there's a lot of characters that you can interchange in your group. There's a lot going on. And it is open world, but you have to go halfway through the game to pretty much open up the world, which is one of my things too when we get to it. Overall, as a summary of the game, it is a decent game. If you've never played the original, I pick up an emulator, play through it. It's not a waste of time, but if you're like me, you get hooked up when you do the studies and you look it up. The expectations of nostalgia for me, and you were talking on this earlier, is like talking about which is the best fast food burger, and it
Oh yeah,
really just turns out where did you grow up
yeah,
because none of them are that good.
yeah. Totally different. Totally different topic, but you brought it up.
There it
Um,
is.
so my girlfriend, Feral Heart, for everybody familiar here, uh, grew up in St. Louis, Iowa, and Texas. So when bringing her out to California, it was oh, have you had In and Out? And I am not one of the In and Out evangelists. I think it's good. I think it's good, right?
It is. It's decent.
It's good. It's good fast food. Um, and hey, have you had this before? She said, "Oh, I'm not interested." It's like, okay, but it's here. Like, do you have a problem with it? And she's like, I just think it's overrated. And it's like, okay, well, when's the last time you had it? It's like, oh, I had it once a long time ago. It's just not as good as Whataburger. And I'm like, okay, fair enough. And then we went to go visit her family in Texas, and I hadn't had Whataburger before, so we went to Whataburger, and I'm like, well, what should I get? She's like, I don't know. Get whatever you want. It's like, okay. So I got evidently the wrong meal because I tried it. I'm like, this is fine. She's like, well, what'd you get? I think I got like a patty melt or something like that. She's like, well, that's not what you should have got. So it is one of those things where like our nostalgia takes us to like, oh, this is what we want. And this is what it was.
Mhm.
And then if you didn't like it the same way that I did, well, you did it wrong. Because it's perfect.
I think games are the same way. That it's not that the burger is good or bad. It doesn't matter. It's what does it remind you
Yeah.
of? It's that's part of the feeling.
Can
But
you appreciate the burger? And if you
yeah,
do, great. And if not, all right, But taste buds change, and so do taste in games. Like I I know for a fact if I played Final Fantasy VI, if I could forget I ever played it, and then I played it now, I would have a different view of it.
so 6 or 3. Which one are we?
Here's the other. Yeah, let's go ahead. I wanted to actually get into this. So I've got a list of questions that I want to follow up with you for,
All
so we
right.
can get some ideas here. How long did you play? Like, how many hours do you think you put into this game? And then we'll also add the extra 3 hours for the first time because emulators and ROMs are weird, especially with translations. Because Final Fantasy 3/6, weird game. Everybody, weird game.
Actual game time. Once I found out that
Mhm.
Final Fantasy VI is Final Fantasy 3 on Super Nintendo,
Yes.
and I found it on the emulator, which I was really worried because I knew I had every game, and I was like, "Wait, I can't find this game to save my life."
Right.
And now I'm good. I put a lot more time into it. Total overall, minus all the problems I was having, maybe about 24 hours.
Okay. Okay. Perfect. Yeah. So for anybody who's not aware, and I still might get this wrong, just because I get it wrong 50% of the time anyway. So released as Final Fantasy VI in Japan because a lot of
Yeah.
the early Final Fantasy games did not come to the U.S. or get anywhere else. They stayed in Japan. Was released as Final Fantasy VI in Japan, or in Japan, and it was released on the Super Nintendo as Final Fantasy III.
Right.
But if you look up an emulator and a ROM on the internet, where it is a global platform, and you look up Final Fantasy 3 or 6, you're right. It's gonna be. There's a good
Well,
chance it's gonna be either of those things.
and the weird spot is like it released in Japan in Final Fantasy VI. They decided to release it in the Americas, so it was here, Canada, that they released it as
Hmm.
3 because it was the third one of the
Yes.
game that they released here. And then when they did the remastered, they called it 6 again, even
Yes.
though that is all the same game.
Right. Yeah. So it is three different titles for one game and one remastered, but that's okay. Okay, so we played about 24 hours. So I looked up the total like expected game time. About how long is this game? It says it's about 35, but that might include some
There's
side quests. That might include some other things. Point is, You played
Yeah.
you played a good chunk, right?
Yeah.
So hey, that's where it is. And I'm also not expecting you to have a stopwatch going and see and like, okay, I've played this. So maybe somewhere in there, totally
Right.
reasonable. How far did you get?
Um, I made it. I played through, so I did. I went straight through. I made it to the boss,
Okay. Okay.
and yeah, I am so underwhelmed by your game from your childhood. I do see why you loved it, but man, I have so many problems that I don't like outside of emulators. I learned that I hate online emulators. That's the
Sure.
first thing. And it's because if you play a lot of video games on the computer, on the PC, when you escape is how you get out of the screen you're in.
Yes.
Escape on an emulator is how you shut it down.
Well, see, escape on my emulator is how I get it to the emulator menu. So the problem is that most games, because they've been because video games have been a thing for a long time, there is like this standard progression of like, hey everybody, the start the this button on the controller is always going to start and pause the game. Hey everybody, this button on the controller is going to bring up your menu more times than not, stuff like that. And then emulators are like, hey, nah, we're gonna do our own thing. We're all completely different from each other. Like,
We do what we want.
yeah, exactly. Okay, so I get that.
But we're not going to talk about. I have a problem with online emulators, but it
Sure.
is just a concentration,
Yeah.
remembering what you did kind of thing.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with them. This isn't Doc shooting down emulators.
No.
But it was very difficult once I found it. And my RetroPie is an emulator, except it's hardware emulator. And I found out the problem with the saves was I wasn't saving in the world, but we'll talk about that. That was actually a problem with the game itself. I didn't realize way back when. As I looked that up, I was like, is this an emulator problem? Nope. Turned out it was a game problem as well. So
Okay. Well, I'll tell you what. Let's go into the what you didn't like. I'm specifically titling these what we liked and what you didn't. So what
Okay.
didn't you like?
It's not that I don't like. I want to start off really soft on this one. You were right. There is a lot that you could do once you pick up the people, like your group. But man, it doesn't do it good like Dragon Quest. I think it was 4 did it really well. Breath of Fire 2 did it really well with switching it out.
I'm actively like seizing right now, but that's okay. Keep going.
It was I can see how somebody can be super overwhelmed with it too. And there are certain instances, especially with some of the side quests, because I did do a few, where if you don't have the right person in your group, you're not going to succeed. But you didn't know before you did it. You'd had to do it, fail, and then do it again.
Okay.
Which to me is like, I hate it when a game is like, you have to do this one thing perfectly or you didn't do it right kind of thing. Even if you're in the general ballpark of it, it's always been one of those disappointing things for me and very frustrating when it comes to something that's a little bit more difficult that takes time and now you got to do it all over again because you feel like you lost that time. You didn't learn anything.
Okay. That's fair. I could see that. Like it goes back to the and this is where I get to be old man yells at cloud with you. The save the actual video game save methodology has changed so significantly. Not just with auto saves, but like when's the last time that you played a game in like that was actually made recently where it's like, hey, I have to actively save my game. Like I have to choose to go into the menu to save my game, and I can only do it at certain points that you've played. And like all games at this point are, hey, here's an autosave feature, and it's a progression based thing. And I know that's a little bit harder with open worlds, because it's like, oh no, well, we're only going to save if you make it to a certain area or if you accomplish a certain task.
Games did. Yeah. You're right that they've learned a lot. I'm talking about this game though. It's disappointing to have a save point that's not a save point, and I can see where the frustration came from that. And it's absolutely correct. I thought it was an emulator thing when we talked about it. Turns out not an emulator thing. People had this problem playing it on an SNES. It's actually one of the reasons a lot of people were like, I don't want to play this game, but they came back to it
See,
eventually.
I've never heard like I've never had that issue. So I don't know if and this isn't a oh I'm coloring it this way. I've never had an issue with a save point, and I don't know was it when you did a quick save it didn't work or when it what was
Didn't
going
look
on?
at. I didn't look into it 100%. I
Okay,
just found that was like I thought it was a problem. I'm also like you said at the beginning very logical, so I was like I don't want to like crap on a game if it wasn't a real problem. If it's
sure.
an emulator problem, I don't want to like. But when I looked into it, turns out people had this, and it was just the quick production of games back then. It was one of those things. So
Okay.
sometimes the script didn't make it, and we all know Final Fantasy is big games. They really are. When they went to CD with Final Fantasy games, you would get 3 or 4 of them. You
Yeah.
never got one because
Yeah.
of how much information it was. And I could see how it got lost, but I also could see why people got frustrated with that. We don't need to beat on it. It was just one of those things where
Sure.
I get like, oh yeah, I could see why if you think you saved and you didn't save and you went to take the trash out and mom turned the TV off or
Right.
whatever, like yeah, I could get that. I
Okay.
100% yeah.
But I like I'm you said we don't need to like beat on it. It's like okay, so what else didn't you like?
The one thing so is the emulator and then my emulator had 2 different names for the characters at the beginning, and I made
Sure.
a little joke on this because it was Wedge and Biggs on the original online emulator, and I
Mhm.
was like, oh, okay, and we're in rebel suits flying around the galaxy, okay, and like it was a thing for me. When I played on my Retro Pi, though, it was Vix, not Biggs,
Yeah.
which is right.
Uh,
I couldn't find it.
Biggs and Wedge.
It was.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Thanks, LucasArts, for
Yeah.
ruining
Yeah.
something.
I like that little homage in this like little it's like, hey, these guys are gonna be here for like a minute. What do we call them?
Yeah,
I don't know. Let's do something nerdy. Let's go. Like, all
I
right.
just saw this movie called Star Wars. I have this idea.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah. I love it. Okay, so you know not a big fan of like the turn-based fighting style in like a video game. I can respect that because it's always one of those weird things where like you know for anybody who hasn't heard us talk before, you know we play a lot of tabletop games, which are
yeah.
literally
Turn
turn-based
based.
game and movement and all that other stuff. And it's one of those things where it's like you have this weird conversation where it's, oh yeah, all of this is happening in the course of 6 seconds. So all of
Yeah,
these things so it's a lot of placement, and then you're doing the exact same thing for a video game where it's like it almost looks like Revolutionary War conversations where it's like, oh, so all of these people are just in a line, and then we
yeah.
have our line, and then we take turns firing back and forth at each other. It's like, no, what you're supposed to presume that all this is happening very fast and but it doesn't work that way because that would be a lot for a Super Nintendo cartridge to process.
You hit it right on the head. It's great for tabletop because it makes sense on tabletop.
Mhm.
But even you're talking to the DM that found ways around that. I have had characters that have such a close relationship at my table, PCs, that I've allowed them to put their turns together and get benefits from going at the same time. You know from playing with me as well, if you roll the same number, I have zero problems with you
Yeah,
both
go at the
acting
same
at the
time.
same
Yeah,
time. That way you can mix it up and get the most out of your turn, and it
right.
makes more sense. I don't like it for video games because like you're waiting for the bar to go, you select something, but then I realized because I did it at that first battle in the mine,
Hmm.
where if you wait for a second, if you don't accept your turn, this thing will go out of turn
Yes.
because you haven't selected yours. And it's like, oh, for a strategy based game, that's terrible. If you're going to do turn based, it really needs to be the order of the
I
turns.
should have made some recommendations to you then, because there is something in the menu where you can go to ATB, Active Time Battle, and you can put it
Right.
onto wait. So basically, when you're in a menu, the game will pause for everybody.
And this is great for games today, but we were
Yeah,
talking about nostalgia. This game
yeah,
was released in 1994.
yeah.
This is 4 years before Google existed. So unless you bought the strategy guide,
Right.
and or you were one of those people like me that just went through every menu when you went to play a game just to see what the customizations were, that's not something you would have known.
No, and that's fair. Unless it's one of those games that, man, I was literally talking about this with somebody not too long ago. I miss the days of buying physical games and the box had that little booklet that gave you some semblance of an idea, but that's it. Like, it didn't actually give you like real instructions. It just gave you like hey, if something's gonna hit you, use your shield to block. And it's like, hey, that's great. What button is shield? And it's like, if you press it at the right time, you'll stun them. Okay, great. What button is shield? That kind of a thing. And and I get that. Okay.
All right, let's move on. You're like, what button is shield? The books were good when you talk about stuff like that, because the first time I played Halo, I had to open up the book on the little diagram of what was what, because and if I end up playing Halo, I'll bring this up again, but it's like, it's a game that, like, what we know as controller, like, you could jump on any first person shooter and all the keys are the same. It was not. And the new updated one allows you to go back to and set it to the new version of what things are. But like, I couldn't remember for the life of me that it's not X button to talk or interact. It was the right button, the bumper. Sure. And I was like, I was sitting there yelling at the game. I'm like, no, there's got to be an option. I went to change it.
There's some way to do this. There's some way to change. All right, fair enough. Okay, let's get into what we did like. I'm going to let you start, because when you stop, I'm going to be able to go for a couple of hours. So I'm going to put a timer on myself. But you tell me what you liked about the game.
There's a few things that I kind of like. Well, there's one more thing I don't like, and I just want to bring it up.
We can go back.
And because we talked about it a little bit, but I wanted to save it. I hate how this game goes from railroad with a little open world to extreme open world, and there's no shift. It's like it just comes out of nowhere and hits you hard. Like, now it's open world, and now you can do that. And I hate the map. I just want to throw that out there. I absolutely hate the map.
Okay. All right.
White dots don't mean anything to me. Tell me where I'm going. But anyway,
that's actually okay. If it means anything to you, I'll agree with you, because I have played this game multiple times since the first time that I played it, and the amount of times that I have like gone on to Google and like brought up a map of the world that gave me a key as far as what dot was what city and stuff.
Right.
All right. Fair enough. I can't argue with that. It's a white dot. That means it's a location of interest. Well, what kind of interest? Because that's important to me right now.
One of the things I mentioned while I was playing that I didn't like, I looked up, and it wouldn't have been fair to mention it in this, but I am going to bring it up a little bit. There were no journals in games back then. These were, and so no game had that. But this game in particular, like, that's what drove me crazy at the beginning, was because I would shut down for a week, come back, and then like, where was I?
Right.
And I didn't remember. And thank God, one of the Nerdwurks community was on while I was playing, was like, hey, I looked up online the guidebook, which I gave him a little crap. Was like, they didn't have guidebooks in 1994. We're going to do this.
So here's the thing. If you had an internet connection in some way, shape, or form, you could go to this website called Game FAQs, Game Facts.
Yes,
and there would be.
I still use Game Facts,
and there would be player written guides on stuff. And man, the amount of text, the amount of gray text on a white background that I read in the day, whoo! That's what got me in trouble when I was on the dial-up, like. Because I have to do this, and then I figured out the whole, like, oh cool, I can just copy it, and I'll copy all of it, and I'll paste it onto Microsoft Word. Okay, great. Now I've got it, and I'm not going to get in trouble. And then I would go through it, and I'm like, oh man, this is good, but it would be so much better if I just had it printed out. And then I would go to print it out, and then I would realize that I was printing like
800 pages.
Yeah, like minimum 150 pages without any kind of a problem. and like go through, and it's like, oh, these are all the people I have to say thank you to for helping me. And I'm like, I've got 20 pages of credits, and I haven't even gotten to the stupid play. I'm 5 hours into the game. So it was a different thing. It was a very different thing.
One what I liked about the
Yes.
game. So I got all those little things out of the way. I love how they used every little bit of the bit of like in both the music portion of it and the graphic portion of it.
The music of this game is possibly like I love this game. It's probably a top
They,
3 feature.
they have the same music they use in Final Fantasy today, but they've just outbidded it and turned it into
Yep.
something else. And you're talking about somebody who knows a lot about sound. So let me tell you, when you have a 16-bit game that sounds like what this game sounds like, that's incredible. They found ways to work around the limitations of the time
Yeah.
to make the sound the way it was, which is incredible. Another thing is the beautiful 3D for 16-bit, the 3D modeling and stuff that they had was beautiful. I wish that the characters were better than the stuff that you fought, but I understand why they could put a little bit more time into that than the characters themselves. But still, it was like that when you fight the mechs and you're not the mechs, the pixelation art is beautiful in that, and it's really well done. You just kind of wish it was that way when you were playing it with your character.
Sure.
Yeah, so stuff like that is just gorgeous. This is also possibly, from what I looked into, there were a lot of open world games of the times. This is the first one that once it becomes open, I won't talk about it anymore, but once it becomes open, is truly an open world game. There's no limitations where you go. They did what some people are doing today in MMOs as they create them. Even World of Warcraft moved over to this, which is like certain sections aren't harder or like above your level. Everything levels with your character, so you're not limited and you have more of an open world thing. And I really felt like I couldn't find something that like totally demolished me because I was in the wrong section at the wrong time. And I tried because I was like, when I realized it was open world, I'm like, let's go somewhere I've never been and see what happens.
Well, here,
And
let's talk about, because we're talking about the open world and when it shifts and everything like that.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert for a near 30-year-old game at this point.
Is it spoiler alert?
I don't know. There's a threshold. But the point is that halfway through the game actually feels like it could be the end of the game.
Yes.
Because you're going up, you're trying to find the evil emperor and his essentially lackey. And okay, great, I'm going to stop them.
Lackey. Yeah, you're looking for the lackey. That's what
you're looking for the lackey, and you find out the emperor has been in league with him the entire time. All this stuff.
Surprise!
And then they destroy the world.
Yeah,
like they actually ruin the world, and then you come back as one character, and at this point, you've collected like 10 to 12 people in your group.
Yeah. It's like 10, yeah.
You come back as one of the characters, and the map has changed. And at this point, if you go and there's like 3 people that you actually have to go see, 3 or 4 people, and you get the airship back, from that point, you can go and beat the game.
Yeah.
Or you can get all the rest of your party and you can explore this entirely new destroyed world. And it's like, when we're talking about open world, it's literally hey, halfway through the game, from that point forward, you can beat the game if you want to. But it's not just side quests. It's, hey, do you want to go get the character that started the game with you? Because that's going to be something we're going around this area. And it's nuts.
And one thing they did really good, because you're right, you could just go beat it, but there is a campaign still going on.
Yeah.
I love that I could tell you, just by knowing what was going on, what was a side quest and what was the campaign. And I love that it was, even though there's no journal, there's nothing to tell you. You knew which ones, like if you want to stay on it, if you want to go do something else, there's this thing you could do. Yeah, and I love that it was really like when they wrote this, they really put thought into that. Like, we need to make sure that they know they're on the campaign trail.
Right.
Because it still is a campaign. Like, it's not like, oh, you can go get all the people back. The game wants you to go get all the people back because there is story in going to get those people.
Yeah. And then at the very end of the game, everybody that you got back, as you're running out of the tower, as it's collapsing, you get this little, like, what's it when it's like the amber grain on a camera where to make it look like a
Oh,
little.
yeah, I know. Yeah.
Yeah, it's got that kind of look while you're like running away in like an old time movie kind of sense. As it's like this happened to this person, this happened to this person, this happened to this person, and it's great. I love that stuff. No, the open worldness is at the time unique, and now I'm done. I'm gonna let you keep going because otherwise I'll keep gushing.
No, there's a lot of stuff about this game. I'm I will say that I'm not a big fan of remastering anything,
Yeah,
but if they changed the few things that really annoyed me, I'm glad they remastered this game.
and that's reasonable. That's reasonable. I'd love to argue, but I don't think I can. Like, if it is something where it's either an issue that I don't remember because my nostalgia is getting in the way, or because I never dealt with it, doesn't mean that it's not an issue. It means
Right.
it wasn't an issue for me, but it is an issue. Um, okay, what else? What else did we like?
What else did you like? Because
Oh, buddy.
so the game's cool, but overall,
Uh-huh.
you hyped it up a lot for me.
So here's okay.
It's would I recommend somebody playing it? Yeah, if you've got extra time, go for it. It's not necessary if you've played other Final Fantasy games. It doesn't explain anything. One of the things that I hate about Final Fantasy is it's never Final Fantasy, but I do understand the titling of it because it's not an American game. They did not create Final Fantasy.
Right.
Like, that's not what it is. But it is funny to me that there are 110 different Final Fantasy titles that all say Final Fantasy.
Well, okay. First of all, shout out to Pyro Sepia Tone. That is exactly what I was looking for
Yes.
earlier. Uh, so some lore behind that. When they made Final Fantasy, it's not supposed to be a game that had. It was a standalone game, because at the end you go and you kill God. Like,
Yeah.
it's
Oh,
no,
yeah, yeah.
this is the game, right? And then they're like, oh wow, lots of people bought this. Well, we should do another game because we have lots of money. And they're like, okay, great. What do we call this one? It's like, well, if we change the name, they might not know it's us because it's the late '80s. So, Final Fantasy 2, and there was like a long discussion as far as what they should call it, and they're like, no, that would be stupid because that you can't have it the second Final Fantasy. Like, that doesn't make sense.
They actually had the conversation
Yeah.
that like it had with me. But the funny thing is they changed it, which is like, no, yes, that was the final for that, which
Yeah.
creates it's supposed to like create this and then that creates
Right.
this. But then they started doing stuff like Final Fantasy 12 2 and then
Yeah.
Final Fantasy 10, what and
X
it was like
and X dash 2 and all the,
yeah, and they weren't in order. Like if you
Right.
look, other ones came out and then they went back
Yep.
to this, and it's like, yeah, you lost me, and that's
Yeah.
okay.
And that's fine. Listen, if I go into Steam right now and I search Final Fantasy, a minimum of 40 titles are going to show up. So, like, that's
Yeah,
reasonable.
and they have 110. That's the
Uh-huh.
I looked it up. There really is 110. And what some of them are like little side things. It's like blah blah
Phone
blah,
games
a
and
Final
stuff like
Fantasy
that, yeah.
Adventure or whatever. Yeah.
What we like, what I like. I've never had a game that was so story rich that I didn't feel like drowned me in exposition. Where it's like, I'm going to now monologue and tell you all the stuff of why this is important to you, instead of it just being important, right? This is a game that I think has like 14 main characters.
15.
15? Yeah, I was going to say, like, there's 14 or 15 main characters, and
I think I found 15. I could have miscounted.
sure, with the exception of like 2, all of them had their own beats and their own moments to where I'm like, I actually care about this character. Like, there's ones that it's like, oh, this is my preferred battle party kind of thing. But as far as like, I don't have a lot of characters in this game that I'm like, you can get rid of them, because I like the story elements that come with those characters. If you feel like going and finding them in the open world after it's been ruined to go get them all again.
You're right that they did a really good job with the story. I mean, I didn't give enough credit to that. They really I felt like they put the story together, and like you said, it didn't feel forced. In fact, some of the cutscenes, you feel like they don't give you enough information until you play it a little bit more, which is beautiful writing. Beautiful writing.
Yeah, no, it's they designed it well. It has I think the most beautiful 16-bit scene of video games with the opera scene. Um, if you talk to anybody who's ever played that game, and here's the thing, we talk about the music, we talk about, oh, they got every good bit of every, they got every bit they possibly could out of this. That scene is what solidifies it for me, because this is just this dumb thing where, hey, you look like this person, we're gonna make you dress like this person, and you're gonna go and perform as them, and you're gonna be bait for this guy, and we're gonna lure him here, and then we're gonna make him join our team and give us his airship. And it's like, all right, this is a really stupid plan that is going to get foiled by this giant smiling octopus, but it's great. The point is, though, in this scene, I'm like it's one of those, like, I think I was like maybe I was 9, 10, 11 years old. I don't remember when I first played this game, and that was one of those scenes where I watched it and I'm like, oh, this is different. This is hitting me different. I've never had that before with a video game, because, like, Donkey Kong jump over the barrel. Like, I'm not, like, that was one of those things where it's like, I've been following. Oh, this is kind of beautiful. Oh, video games can be art sometimes. This is great. And
story could have depth. I think it was one of the other things,
yes,
too. Yeah.
100%. 100%. Yeah, you know what? That's fine with me. This the story, the music, the look, all extremely good, as far as I'm concerned. And it sounds like, yeah, you're a fan of those in this game as well. So I'll tell you what. I've got 2 rating systems that I want to give you. All right.
Okay.
And then we're gonna wrap up here. So the first one, and this is for my nostalgia. This is for you talking to me.
Okay.
Is the game good? Was it good for the time, or is it bad? And I know it's like, I don't want to just say it's bad if it's not, like, something I think is good. But don't worry, we're gonna have another rating system after this to where you can.
Well, I mean, it's an interesting one. So it's not good for its time. Okay. But it's not necessarily good.
Okay.
Again, because of its downfalls, of a gamer today, somebody who's never played, or a younger person is like, I want to play the original Final Fantasy 6 and see or 3 or whatever, and see what the hype was about, and they go in to play it, they're gonna get bombarded, and they're gonna be like overwhelmed with a game that was made before games really became overwhelming, and I think that will set anybody off. I don't think the game holds up. However, I think that if you could push through that and you want to play it, you'll enjoy it. Okay. But I think that a lot of people are just getting turned off about the system itself.
So, between is it good for the time, or bad, I'm feeling like you're saying it's good with the exception of some pretty big pitfalls.
It's good for the time. It's like in between them really well. Yeah,
I will take that. All right. So here's our actual rating system. Okay. Now it's a 5. It's a. Yep, I did that right. 5-tier rating system. Okay.
Oof.
We're gonna use this every time. Garbage. Meh.
Okay.
Decent. Good. Truly great. And we might play around with some of the words here to make it a little bit more, but these are the ones that I wrote down as I was getting ready for this recording today. So this is what we're starting with. Garbage, meh, decent, good, truly great.
Nerdwurks for your childhood.
Mm-hmm.
It's decent, leaning towards good.
Okay. I will take that. I will take that. Because like you said, I understand where you're coming from. I have held back from arguing with you at every point because this is like because that's what it is, you know. That's kind of why we wanted to do this. It's like I want to investigate, like, hey, totally unbiased eyes.
Mhm.
What do you think? Because that's a good way of looking at things, right? Um, this is not a perfect game, but it is a perfect for me game, and that's
Okay.
why I love it. Right? This is you and I wouldn't be doing this kind of stuff. I don't think you and I would have met if not for this game, because this got me into role playing games, which eventually led me into tabletop games, which eventually led me to meeting you and doing all this nonsense.
Yeah.
So this is an extremely important game to me, which is really hard to separate from all of that. So of course I think it's truly great, but unbiased, decent to good, totally reasonable.
And you got to remember and that's done as a game that, in my opinion, is the first of its time.
Yeah,
Is it's at the very beginning of open world and story, like where because video games at this point had story, but a story that you could throw away because it's not what it was about. It was about the action of the game. This was one of the first. It's at the beginning of this open world concept idea and this story make you care about the
right.
character idea of gaming.
The first Legend of Zelda game started with an old man in a cave saying it's dangerous to go alone, take this with you.
Yeah,
He gave you a wooden sword and then go. Like
yeah,
so it's and that's not that far removed. That's not we're not talking decades earlier, you know, from
yeah.
that
No,
point.
no.
So it I am with you and I can appreciate that. Like this game did something really, really ballsy that I don't think a lot of games since then have even attempted to do, where it destroyed the world
Oh yeah,
halfway through the game. It's
yeah.
like, hey, not only did you lose, you
Hmm.
lost bad.
And there's no way to win.
Yeah, you can go now that you've done it. Great, you can go and you can beat the final boss. Great, he's gone. You're still living in this shithole.
Yeah.
So all you did was you took the thing that became bad and you made it slightly less bad. But
Even
I kind of dig
even
it.
if even if this game was garbage, and it's not,
Yeah.
but even if it was, I think it started this thing. I don't think it's because of the money it made. I
Mm-hmm.
think people that were creating video games had their stories in their head that they were creating.
Yeah.
Like if you ever want to have a good laugh, learn how Halo came to be. Like
Oh
go and
boy.
look about the conception of Halo. Its original name, which I'm not going to say here because we're trying to be more PG-13 all the time, is like, and they changed the original title was changed because the guy who was an overseer for the game did not want to tell his parents, "Hey, I'm working on this game called this," and
Yeah.
so they ended up changing the name of the game.
Yeah.
But like, even if this was garbage, it showed people it was possible.
Right.
Because even like a game I played a lot of, the Dragon Quest game that I was talking about, Dragon Quest 6. It was Zelda on steroids. It was bigger. There were changes. It wasn't just one person kind of thought process. But in the game, in the end, it's not what this game was. And when I mentioned that I just liked the character changes, it's because they were very specific roles, and I enjoyed that.
Mm-hmm.
I needed that because that was at the beginning of gaming. People, the boomers weren't gaming. The Gen X was just starting to game. They weren't creating this for anybody else. We didn't have video games made for adults because nobody played video games. My mom played Pong. I own the original Pong because my mom had a Pong. And it was pretty much just a thoughtless game that she would play just to ease down.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that she's at the end of that boomer phase. When it comes to us Gen Xers, though, and on, we were the first people they created games for. They weren't creating games for the older people at the time. It was for kids. And so they didn't have anything else. That's what I'm saying. Even if this game would have bombed, game developers would have been like, oh, open world story concept, care about the characters. Because even if the game was garbage, people would have still cared about the characters with good writing. And that would have brought us into, we would have still expanded to what video games are today. So,
Even the other Final Fantasies before it, where you got the airship and you could technically go around the entire world and stuff. There were some side quests and stuff, but you were dealing with a pretty small party for the most part. You were dealing with, hey, this is the next place that we need to go. So you can go
You
there.
can
You
go
want
to
to take a
these.
detour, but like, yeah,
You could go to the other places, but they didn't do anything. You had to have anything happen in the game. You had to go to the next
there was a
spot.
sequence
Yeah,
as opposed to in this game where it's like, hey, there's some side quests and stuff like that in the first half. You get to the second half, and it's like, all right, great, you're here. Here's some sequencing, but basically, this isn't a flow chart.
right.
This is a tangled spider web of if you're here, it's going to do this. If you're here, it's going to do this. And maybe it's different if you have some person in your party versus someone. But
Mhm.
I get that, where it's like, hey, this was chaotic because it's the first time that they really went ham on like literal open world,
Oh yeah.
which also meant that it wasn't the cleanest version of it and the map was junk. But overall, decent to good. I'll take it.
Yeah.
Any closing thoughts before we get out of here?
Um, about this game, no, I think I said it already, which is if you like Elden Ring, you like the Elder Scrolls, you like stuff like that. Thank Square Enix for creating Final Fantasy VI in Japan, so they can bring Final Fantasy III here
Mm-hmm.
to inspire generations of game designers in the future to get what we have today.
Yeah, good job, Square. Appreciate you. All right, everybody. We're gonna be back here in a month ish. We'll figure out the exact date. But we're going to be back here in about a month to discuss what's your next game and
I'm
who's it from, Doc?
I'm moving from one person in your household to another
Yeah.
as we went from Nerdworks' childhood to Final Fantasy 6/3/6 remastered, whatever, to one that doesn't bounce around like that, which is the original Spyro the Dragon for Feral Heart and her childhood.
Yeah. By the way, the real title of this game is Final Fantasy. And you just do that, and it's fine. So, yeah, exactly. Everybody, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. And yeah, remember, you can't ruin your childhood if you don't remember it right. We'll talk to y'all next time. Ah!
Are we muted yet?